When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadabji, your podcast host, a practicing clinical social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 45, ending the era of the uncertainty, the imposter, and the infertility stigma. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing a pretty awesome and daring guest. Big warm welcome to Alyza Rethink. Alyza was born and raised in Nairobi, Kenya, until she moved to Canada in the year 2000. She now resides in Toronto, Ontario, with her husband and 2 young children, and is the co-founder and chief operating officer of Integra Health Centre. With a vision to elevate healthcare to a truly patient-centered model, she co-founded Integra Health Centre in 2015. With her core beliefs in mind, Integra was built to bring a truly integrated and collaborative model of care that benefits patient outcomes in ways never seen before in traditional healthcare models. Coming from a family of entrepreneurs, Alyza realized from a young age that a true way to affect change is to be the driver in that change. Alyza loves to travel and immerse herself in different cultures, as she truly believes that looking outside the bubble we live in is where real understanding and growth happens. Her wealth of experiences around the world have helped in shaping the beliefs she has for healthcare, including mental health and its accessibility and delivery. Hi, Alyza. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Hi, Salima. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Alyza, I feel so fortunate to share space with you today on the show. I am really thankful for your willingness to be here sharing your story with us shortly. I also just feel this immense delight to know that I have your support in taking a stance with me to start helping break those barriers of mental stigma. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Alyza, I also just want to share with you a little bit about this podcast. I know you know a little bit about it already, but just to recap, it's all about bringing forward those untold stories that people go through, whether directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And one thing we know is that no matter what a person's story is, there is impact on one's own mental health. And that's the part that seems to get tucked away or stay tucked away. So this platform is a way to break those barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. So the intention here for today, the intention for this podcast, I hope together that we can encourage people and continue to encourage people to share and tell what people typically have hesitations for expressing. And so on that note, Something I'm bringing forward is a trend which I hope really starts to take, and it's called the mental beauty rethink. So, Alyza, what are your thoughts about this? What strikes for you when you hear those words, the mental beauty rethink?
I love it. I think it's so important to start reframing the way we think about mental health instead of thinking of it as something to not talk about, something that should be tucked away and having this negative connotation. And I think
Mm-hmm.
when you reframe it in a way to say mental beauty, I think it resets our mind in the way that we think about it. And I think it's amazing because it's about time that we just start thinking about our mental health in the way that we think about our physical health. And when you put it in a way like mental beauty, it just allows us as people to think about things a little differently. So I think it's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thought reframing is exactly what it
Mhm.
is. You hit it bang on, right? So that negative connotation, right? So just resetting the mind, giving it an opportunity to see it from a different perspective, and that it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be this way or that way, but it could be part of a whole.
Mhm.
And sharing space with physical health, like, or just health and
Mhm.
wellness, and that it's part of health and wellness just as much as physical health is part of health and wellness.
Exactly.
Such a great take on that. And truly to hear your firsthand thoughts, that's just pretty cool. Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
Okay. So, are you ready to get started?
I'm ready. Let's do this.
Okay, let's do it. Okay, here we go. Alyza, give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. How would it read?
Okay, that's a hard one when I think about that. But I think when I think about myself and I think about everything that I've been through and where I'm at today and
hmm
thinking about my past and my past experiences, when I think about a newspaper headline, I'm thinking the external world will never know my imposter.
The external world will never know my imposter?
Hmm.
Ooh, that's a good one. Okay, fascinating. Say a little bit more about this headline.
So when I think about myself and when I think about where I'm at today and when I think about the imposter syndrome that I struggle with so heavily and so many of us struggle with, I think a lot of it comes down to us showing the people in our lives and society as a whole what we want them to see. And I think for me, it's like you put on this front and you try to be the person that everyone thinks you are when internally you struggle so much. And I think all of us really do. And I'm happy and proud that I'm able to admit this. And essentially looking at myself and realizing that there's so much work that I need to do and so much that the world will not see. And when we look at this age of social media and things like that, we really just, as a society, as people, we put out there what we want people to see. But what people should also realize is there's so much more than what we put out there. We as human beings, we as people are not just what we allow everyone to see. There's a story behind every one of us. And we have this way of thinking about things sometimes when we just look at someone and think this is their whole story because that's what we allow people to see. So when I think about the imposter, it's just basically just showing people a very small snippet of who you are, but people but not realizing that there's so much more to this layer of who you are.
So there's more than that meets the eye. The
Hmm.
external world doesn't know what happens with that internal struggle or what is a struggle for you
Exactly.
internally. hmm And I guess you've been getting to know your imposter.
And I work on it. I try to work on it, and I try to acknowledge the fact that it exists
hmm
because a lot of the time you're showing everyone a part of you that you believe so heavily in yourself, and then you push everything else down.
hmm
It's also realizing that there's a part of you that it's okay to deal with. It's okay for it to come up, and it's okay to acknowledge that you're not 100% okay all the time.
Right. Now, I know there's a part of this imposter piece that is part of the bigger part of your untold story. So I'm curious about how it all fits together. So if you're ready to share more about your untold story, go for it. Let us know what it is, how it's manifested. I'm all ears.
So, as you kind of mentioned, I was born and brought up in Kenya, in Nairobi, Kenya. I grew up there until I was about 16. It's an amazing place. I absolutely love it. It has a huge part of me. It shaped a huge part of who I am today. But growing up in a place like Kenya it's not always easy because when you look at it as a society, it's very small. And when I say small, I think everyone kind of knows you, everyone sort of knows your family, knows your business, but yet doesn't want to acknowledge the bad parts of what's going on.
So when you say small society, like, do you mean
Mm-hmm.
like a tight-knit community?
Yes, exactly. That's a
Okay.
good way to put
Okay.
it. It's a tight knit community where everyone knows everybody else. You're pretty much guaranteed that if you're out at dinner, you're going to bump into like everybody you know,
Okay.
or like at least a few people that you know. So that's sort of just one of those things. So growing up in a place like that, you look at the way your friends grow up and you look at like their families and you start to compare it to your own. And I grew up with there was my mom, my dad, and my brother, small family, and it wasn't always amazing. You know, it wasn't always that like traditional family of like, you know, everyone's great and we're like the Brady Bunch and everyone gets along and everything's awesome. But you know, there was a lot of things that happened in the background. You know, my parents had a stressful marriage, I guess, to put it that way, if there's one way to put that. Like there was a lot of abuse that happened. There was between like my dad was abusive towards my mom, and witnessing that as a child was difficult, especially growing up in a place like Kenya, because back then you don't know what's happening, and so you see a lot of things with your friends' parents, and you see like that on the outside, everyone's getting along and the grass is always greener. You know, I feel like as a child and even through adolescence, you look at it and you're like, their family's so happy. Why is my family not happy?
Right.
And there was a lot of things that would happen in my house when a day to day on the weekends. That's not to say it was always bad, but there was a lot of times where you're just kind of waiting for that next shoe to drop. You're waiting for something to happen all the time. And growing up like that was difficult because it would come to a point where it's like my dad would come home on a Saturday after having like you're always waiting and it's like was he going to have a good golf game or a bad golf game? Was it going to be would he come home and there'd be a fight or would it be okay? So that caused a lot of anxiety within myself as a child because you don't know whether it's going to be a good day or a bad day.
Mm-hmm.
And with my parents, like my dad also struggled with gambling, and I think that kind of added to the issues in the house. And would he go to the casino and win, or would he go to the casino and lose? And so when he comes home, and my mom would bring it up to him, they would start a fight, and then I would look at it and be like, "Oh my God, she's the one starting the fight. What is happening here? Like I
Mm-hmm.
hate her," and I'd blame her for it. Again, there was a lot of mental abuse. There was a lot of physical abuse, not to myself, but I witnessed it growing up in a place like Kenya, it was difficult for my mom to like leave. So my brother and I were always going through this. And I think as a child, my coping mechanism was to become an introvert and just become very kind of like take everything in, push everything down and find my comfort zones and really stick within those comfort zones.
Okay.
Whereas I had a brother who I think his coping mechanism was to be like a bigger than life personality. And
Mm-hmm.
so I always looked at him and I was like, why can't I be more like that? Why am I so shy? Why can't I ever get out of my comfort zone? And I think
Mm-hmm.
now when I look back, I realize there was so much that had happened in my childhood that I didn't know how to cope. And I think as a child, like you don't know these things. And as a child, like growing up in a place like Kenya, it's also very difficult because there's nobody to talk to. Back then, there was a lot of, you know, you're just supposed to be okay no matter what you're going through all the
Right.
time. Mental health is not a real thing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that was just the general thought process in the community back then. And so you didn't talk about it. And again, like what did I know? I was a kid, right? And so I didn't realize that, you know, the emotions I was actually feeling were signals. You know, it
Mm-hmm.
was telling me that something's wrong, you know, like
Right.
something you need to deal with this. But I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah, but back then
Mm-hmm.
you were so young. I mean,
Yeah.
you're still maturing and developing in so many different ways. And you alluded a couple times to the idea of like walking on eggshells
Mm-hmm.
when you said that you didn't know if when you went home if it was going to be a good day or a bad day, and it would depend on your father's mood and if he won or if he lost or how it was going to be, and all these different pieces of maybe I'm curious if you were like
Mm-hmm.
anticipating certain moods and certain like behaviors, and you had certain environmental cues that you were using to gather your information of like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, this is what it's going to be like. And if that was all happening to you from a
Mm-hmm.
young age, your mind was busy.
Yeah.
Right? So no wonder you were doing all this stuff internally. And
Mhm.
then to top it off, you mentioned how you've been comparing yourself to your brother and like
Mhm.
how he managed his life and how he coped with all of that stress. Did you guys ever talk about it together?
Not for a long time. And I think as much as we were in it together, we were also going through it very separately. because the way he would deal with it again was like he became this bigger than life personality, whereas I took it and was like, you know what, I just sheltered in myself, and we never, it was almost like if we talked about it then it was real. You know, if we talked about
Right.
it within ourselves then we'd acknowledge that this is what's happening. And I think neither one of us were really prepared to do that, because
Mm-hmm.
as soon as you have that conversation, that very real conversation, then your situation becomes very real.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, I don't think either one of us were mature enough or old enough to really see it and acknowledge it. And I think my mom tried her best as she possibly could to like shelter us from it. Obviously, as you're, you know, as kids, as much as you try to, you know, your parents try to shelter you, it's not always feasible, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I have this distinct memory, and I don't know if it's because growing up in a place like, or just being in a place like Kenya as a woman, the way that society treats you and the way that society tells you to do things is very different than when I look at the way society is now, or like rather a little bit more open now. And back then it was very much like, you know, my mom had to stick it out. She had to just be, you know, it was okay. She just kind of kept going. I think now when I talk to her, she tells us, you know, I stuck it out for you and Alim, who's my brother. And I tell her now, and I'm like, you know, I wish so much that you'd left so much sooner. But again, you know, she did the best that she could at the time. And I think
Right.
for me, I have this distinct memory of, it was after my brother had left. And when I say left, he'd come to Canada for university because he's 4 years older than me. So he'd left. And my parents had gone out to their friend's house and I was home, and they came back and there was a bookshelf outside of my room. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember them coming home, and I remember it had been like a period of everything was good for like a little while. And so you're kind of like letting your guard down a little bit more because you're like, oh, things are okay. Everything's going okay. And then they come home and I hear this shouting, and I have this memory of just curling inwards and being like, oh my God, is it going to go from like shouting to hitting to like what's going to happen now? And
Mm-hmm.
so I remember like the shouting got like louder and then ended up being outside my room. And then I remember thinking like I should do something, but then what am I going to do? And I remember coming outside of my room and I don't know like what exactly happened in that moment, but I remember like getting hit with in the head with a mug. And I don't remember if it was my mom or my dad, and I don't remember anything. But I think in that moment, my mom had realized what had happened. And I think almost like that moment, she decided like she'd had enough. You know, like this is not a
Like her
way
breaking
to,
point.
exactly, it's not a way to raise children.
Or like a reality check. It was just kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Because it sounds like you've been telling me your mom had a very protective stance over you, right? So she might not have been telling you and your brother everything
Mm-hmm.
that was going on. Like you might have been privy to seeing a lot of things, but there
Mm-hmm.
might have been a lot of other things that she might have been protecting you from,
Yes.
right? And that protective stance, it's kind of like a form of denial. So it
Mm-hmm.
is possible that your mom was also maybe trying to convince herself that, okay, it can get better now, it could get
Yeah.
better, or see this changed, or he's okay now. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe that erases some of all of the unfortunate stuff that happened. So I'm wondering if that's what you see now, that your mom had this protective stance and it might have been some sort of way of hiding it, like denying
Mm-hmm.
it, not being aware. What do you think?
Definitely. When I look at it now, and even like just through the conversations I've had with my mom through the years now, she definitely had that. To her, it was like she didn't want to take us away from our home. She didn't want us to be part of a broken family, because back then there was
Hmm.
such a stigma around divorce. You don't get divorced, you stick through it.
Hmm.
And she didn't want us to be this kids who had to deal with all that stuff.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
to her, it was like, maybe it's better to stick it out because he will change. He apologized and everything was okay for a little while. And then, you know, it got bad again, but it was a cycle. Like it's a cycle of abuse, right?
Yes,
And I think
exactly.
when you're in it, you don't realize. Being in a place like Kenya, as like I've said, as great as it is, support systems back then were garbage. You know, it was just like there was such a stigma around everything. If you're in an unhappy marriage, it doesn't matter. You go through the motions and you stick it out and you do what you have to do because you don't get divorced and you don't leave.
She tried to handle it the way that she knew how.
Exactly.
Hmm.
She sheltered us from it in the best way possible. You know, she kept us
Hmm.
busy with school and activities and all those sort of things. But again, like, you know, you come home, and when home is not a happy place and home is an anxious place, it's difficult, especially as a child when you don't realize what you're going through and you don't realize that these emotions are strong and they're going to affect you. And, you know, we love to say now that children are resilient. They're resilient, sure, but what happens in that moment affects you down the road. You know, it's going to
Right.
affect you for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Big decisions.
Yeah. And so then what finally happened is she just decided to like leave. She was like, I think
Mm-hmm.
I've had enough. And she picked
Yeah.
up, and I was 16. And
Mm-hmm.
in that moment, we left. And to me, I was like, what are you doing to me? This is the worst thing you can do. And, when
Mm.
you're 16, you're leaving your home, you're leaving everything you've ever known.
Yeah. Everything that was familiar to you, everything
Exactly.
that you knew.
Yeah, exactly. You're in this like prime of your life as a teenager.
Yes.
You're
When you're a
starting to
teenager,
like,
when you're 16, that's
yeah,
prime time life, right
exactly.
there.
Life is starting. You're like learning to have that independence. And then all of a sudden it's like, all right, well, we're leaving. And what I didn't realize then is my mom left at a time where she was doing really well financially and things were going very well. But she was like, no, I can't do this anymore. And she made a decision to just start over, and she was almost 50 and she just left.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, I absolutely hated her for it. And I was like, you're taking me away from my home. You're taking away from my dad. Because as much as my dad was abusive towards my mom, he was not bad towards me or my brother. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I didn't see it at the time. And to me, I was like, you know what? Yeah, there's a lot happening, but you're taking me away from everything that I've known.
Everything that you know and everything that you love and everything that's familiar and
Exactly.
meant something to you, right?
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so we moved to Canada. We were very lucky to be able to have Canadian citizenship from before. And so it wasn't a big struggle to move. But we came here, we had an amazing support system. My mom has an incredible sister, and we were able to like live with her for couple of years. But it was difficult. And I think when I came here, I saw this thing in myself where it was like, I, again, really started to just become very introverted. I was always
Mm-hmm.
very introverted, but it really started to manifest very heavily because I didn't want to go out and meet new people and make new friends. And I was lucky enough to have had one of my friends move here, one of my really good friends move here from Kenya a few years before me. And so she'd gone to the same school as me, and I had met some of the friends that she'd met. And so I didn't have to like go out and meet new people. I'd already had this predetermined group of friends. And so that was comfortable to me. And then every
Mm-hmm.
weekend I would go to my friend's house and we'd have our sleepovers and we'd do those things. And I never really stepped outside of my comfort zone because to me, I was like, I don't want to do this because I'm leaving everything that I've known. And now I'm just going to like curl up into this little comfort level that I have.
Right. So it was just being in your comfort zone. You already had someone pave the way for you of
Yeah, pretty
kind
much.
of like those social unknowns. So you knew where to fit what you needed to fit
Mm-hmm.
and glide through where you needed to go in terms of just the academics and the social pieces.
Yeah.
So tell me more about what it was like to come out of your shell. I'm really curious about this imposter and how did it emerge? Like, tell me more about how it emerged. Or did it follow you, like from when you were in Nairobi, when you were in Kenya?
Mm-hmm.
Did it show up or manifest differently, like when you
Mm-hmm.
came to Canada versus when you were in Nairobi, when you were in Nairobi, Kenya? Like, what was that like?
I think it definitely manifested differently. I didn't realize what it was. I didn't realize the feelings I was feeling at the time. And I think a lot of mental health issues and a lot of like things that we deal with our mental health, they manifest, but then a lot of the times we're taught to just push them down. So that's what I did. We moved here and things would come up and I would be like, anytime anything was going well in my life, I'd think this shouldn't be happening to me. I don't deserve this. Waiting for like something bad to happen all the time because that was just my life. That was the way I grew up. I was always just waiting for the next shoe to drop. And so that
Hmm.
continued to happen. And a few years after I moved here, I met my husband and we met.
Hmm.
I think I was like I was 18, just turning 19, and we were very young and we met. He was different religion. I'm a Smiley. He was Hindu. And so initially, you're not even thinking of those things. You're 18. You're like, whatever. Like, we're not even. Who knows what's going to happen down the road?
Right.
Anyway, I guess like we'd been together for quite a few years. Things got serious. His parents found out about us, and that was a struggle. And so for me, it was like I never allowed myself for a long time to be happy in that relationship, truly happy, because I was like, his parents aren't going to accept us, and that was me being like, because I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough for his family. I'm not. We're not going to be good enough to get married. Like it's just going to be a whole thing. And so that idea of not being good enough, that idea of like, always being anxious just kept manifesting constantly in everything that I did.
Did you mean that you were predicting this before you even met your boyfriend's family? Your
Mm-hmm.
boyfriend at the time, like is your husband now?
Yeah.
Is that kind of what you were thinking before you met them, or is that what happened after you met them?
I think I wasn't really thinking it before I met, because to me, the conversations I'd had with my mom, she was always very open, and to her it was always find someone, it doesn't matter the religion or culture they're at, just find someone who
Mhm.
treats you right.
Okay.
Whereas with my husband's family at the time, it was very much, you need to find someone who is Hindu. Nothing else will work.
Mhm.
So I didn't really think about it until I actually met him and until we started to have those conversations.
Mhm.
And then things sort of started to get serious, and his parents found out about us. And then it was very much like, well, you need to just break up with her because you can't be with someone who's not of the same religion. And I was convinced
Mhm.
that, well, he was just going to break up with me because, that's just what people
Mhm.
do. And I wasn't going to
Mhm.
be good enough to fight for. But he fought for it. He really stood his ground, and he was like, no, this is the person I want to be with. And it was a struggle, and
Mhm.
eventually they kind of caved and we got married. And there was a lot of struggle and there was a lot of issues there, but to me, I think that was the first time I really saw and acknowledged that, you know what, maybe I was good enough to fight for.
Right. Mhm.
With that being said, like, I think we got married, we ended up living with my in-laws for about a year, which, needless to say, like, given the history, it was difficult.
Right.
We ended up moving out after that year and starting our life. And we decided that we're going to wait a little while to have kids. We're going to, live our life. We're going to travel. We're going to do all these things. So fast forward a few years, we did the things we wanted to do. We focused on our careers. And then we're like, okay, maybe like we should settle down. Like, we want to have kids. And so,
Mhm.
like, that's something we should start thinking about. So we
Right.
started thinking about it. I think we were kind of at that point where we're like, yeah, things just work. You check off these boxes, you focus on your career, you get married, you have kids. That's just like, if you want to have kids, then, that's the sort of natural order of things. And you're like, yeah, and it's just going to work. Right.
Right.
And, we started trying and it wasn't working. It's been like 6 months, and I'm like, what's happening here? And so we started seeing a fertility clinic. We were like, yeah, they're like, we'll do a few rounds of IUI and hopefully that'll work. And so now it comes up in my head where I'm like, well, I'm not good enough. What's going on? And
Mhm.
so that person, that like imposter, that anxiety starts to manifest itself again. And then on top of it, you're dealing with a society with it's just not something that's so openly talked about if you're having issues. And so
Mhm.
we did a few rounds of IUI, didn't work. I think it was like 5 rounds. And I looked at Raj, like, who's my husband, and I was like, I can't keep doing this.
Mhm.
We need to like have a reset.
Mhm.
And so he's amazing. And he was like, of course. We were both struggling with it. And we decided we were just going to take off, went to Spain for a couple of weeks, had this incredible trip, came back. We decided we were going to start IVF. And I
Mhm.
remember talking to like my mom and like my in-laws, and my mom was like amazingly supportive, and she was like, yeah, of course, do whatever it is that you need to do, and we're here for you and all that. And I think at the time I didn't really want to open up to a lot of people, because to me it was like, oh my god, something's wrong with me.
So the imposter showed up again.
Exactly. What is wrong with me? So I shouldn't be talking about this.
Mm.
So like when we spoke to my in-laws, it's like very, I don't know if it's like a South Asian thing. Maybe don't talk too much about it, because what will people think?
Right.
And in that moment, I was like, yeah, what will people think? People are going to think that there's something wrong with me.
So they asked this question, this open-ended question, what will people think? Which is not the first time that I've heard
Hmm.
this, and I've experienced it myself too, right? But just what will people
Exactly.
think somehow trumps and overrides anything else that we're experiencing, which
Hmm.
is so not the case, but it's not how we process it. And so you started answering the question with what sorts of answers?
So then I looked at it and I was like, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't talk about it. And then I started going through it and I
Mhm.
was like, you know what? Why the hell am I not talking about it?
Right.
I don't care what people think. And honestly,
Mhm.
if the people in my life think that there's something wrong with me because I struggle with infertility, then do I really
Mhm.
need them in my life? And I almost had this aha moment. And I was like, you know what? Well, screw you if you think there's something wrong with me. So I decided to just start talking about it. And I was very
Right.
open about it. I was very open about my struggles with it. And I mean, we were lucky enough to only have to go through like a couple rounds of IVF, and we've got an amazing boy and an amazing girl. And while I was going through it, I found this amazing community of
Mhm.
people who were also struggling with infertility and going through IVF. And I really started to open up, and I found comfort in talking to people. And I think a lot of the time we're so scared of what people will think that we don't open up and realize that there's so much support out there.
Mhm.
And people will not necessarily judge you for the things that you think they're going to judge you for. In anything, it's like half the time when you talk about your struggles and you talk about the things that you've gone through, you never know who you're helping. So many people I've spoken to about IVF and infertility, and I constantly get the questions like, oh, do you mind just like telling me how you went through it? Like, what did you go through? Because, I'm struggling right now and this is what I'm going through. And again, it just really goes to show that if you open up, you don't know who you're helping and you don't know how much you're helping them.
And did you also find, as you talk about your story and you unpack it and let people in and slow your process down, did you feel like you were able to process more and understand more about yourself and learn more about yourself in that process while by default maybe helping someone?
Definitely.
Yeah. And what did you learn about yourself? What kinds of things were you tapping into about those moments for yourself?
So I think with myself, what I realized is that I am enough.
Tell me more. I am enough. Tell me more. I'm so excited.
So I think in that moment, you really, when you start opening up and you start talking to people about your struggles, you realize that there's so many people who are going through similar things. And for so long, you've been told that, like, your mental health, we don't talk about it. We put it away and we shove it so far down.
Yeah.
But then eventually something's going to burst.
Right.
So I started talking about it, and I've been very open about like seeing a therapist. And then you realize I'm enough. I'm okay. And I'm not saying that I've fixed myself. It's more so just I've slowly come to the realization that the more I talk about it and the more open I am with it and with my struggle and with everything that I've been through, I realize that there's so many other people going through the same things and that it's really important that we do talk about it. We're not striving for perfection. That's sort of like where I landed with all of this. And I think it's the constant need to like work on yourself and like acknowledge your feelings in the same way that if you have chest pain, you're going to go to the emergency room.
Right. It's a signal that something is not okay. It's a message.
Exactly. So for me, it's recognizing those signals and recognizing those messages, because that's how I'm going to get to like recognize in myself that I'm enough. And I have to keep reminding myself that that's okay, no matter the struggle you're going through, or no matter like you may not be everything that everyone else is, but you're enough.
It is such an important message, and it's much more compassionate and kind way of treating yourself and meeting yourself with that love and care and tenderness. It's much more nurturing than all of the ways that many of us have been conditioned, right?
One time I don't remember who told me this, but it was, if you're downplaying your story so much, how are you ever going to look at it and accept it and like start to be like, yeah, I struggled too, but just in my mind, my struggle wasn't as bad as your struggle. It doesn't mean I didn't struggle. And someone once was like, if your best friend came to you and said these things about themselves, would you turn around and be like, yeah, you're right. You're nothing. Like, you don't deserve to be happy. What would you say to your friend who like came and told you something like that? So it's also acknowledging you should be kinder to yourself.
Of course. And as humans, we are programmed to be compassionate beings. And research will tell you that we are much more at ease to be kind and compassionate and forgiving and loving to other people and to our heart connections. But when it comes to ourselves, we are much harsher towards ourselves. But if we were able to give ourselves the same as what we give others, that's when the shift and the transformation really starts happening from within. Really glad that you had that eye-opening experience for someone to call you out on that and kind of give you that reality check for yourself. That's amazing. So, Alyza, when people come to see me for therapy in the therapy space, right? People are typically in one of three places. Sometimes people are just getting started into their journey or their story, and people come to see me for like deep work, right?
Yeah.
And so some people are in the middle of their story and they're in the thick of it, needing some help to navigate how to manage where they need to go or what they need to do. And some people are looking back, and looking back meaning they need some closure so they can move forward, or they're trying to get some sort of repair or processing or understanding of something so that then they can step forward and create a new chapter in their life. Where would you say you are in your journey? Would you say that you're getting started, you're in the middle, or you're looking back?
I would say I'm definitely in the middle.
Definitely in the middle?
Yes. And the reason I say that is because I have acknowledged that there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot that I have gone through, and, there's a lot that I have to acknowledge that I had to deal with. And there's a lot of emotions that have come up. The imposter kind of continues to show itself. And the anxiety continuously like manifests in a lot of things that I do. I also feel that there's so many experiences that we're consistently going through as people. As much as you make 10 steps forward, sometimes you're taking, like, I don't want to say 10 steps back, but like kind of like regress a little bit. So for me, it's, I feel like I'm doing okay. And then all of a sudden something will happen that'll pull me back. And then I have to keep coming back to the fact that I'm enough. I'm okay. I need to deal with things. Something like somewhat recently that happened was, so I started to repair this relationship with my dad.
Mm-hmm.
We started to get onto like better footing. You know, my brother and I had really started to talk about like the things that had happened with my dad, and we both decided that we wanted to like have a better relationship with him, being that we've got kids now and we really wanted him to know our kids. He came here to visit us and we started to like build that relationship again, and you know, things had gotten a little bit better, and then he passed away. You're kind
Mm-hmm.
of dealing with that guilt constantly, you know, with like, oh my God,
Mm-hmm.
did I do enough and all that. So when I talk about being in the middle, like stuff you're constantly just kind of dealing with.
Well, it definitely sounds like you've recognized the past, you're honoring the past, you're aware
Mm-hmm.
of how it has shaped who you are today,
Mm-hmm.
and you're simply stating that for you and your story and your journey, you have more to acknowledge and there's more parts to uncover and unpack, right?
Exactly. Yes, definitely.
It's been such a delight. There's so many different parts of your story. We're really connecting that uncertainty to the
Mhm.
imposter, to stigma, not just infertility stigma, but mental stigma, and just
Mhm.
seeing how it all is intertwined and interconnected and how it has brought your whole full story forward. And I'm really curious about how it has really affected your mental health. I know
Mhm.
that you started to mention that sometimes that imposter has heavily weighed in on anxiety, right?
Mhm.
So, how
Yeah.
do you know you're experiencing anxiety? How does it show up for you?
So for me, a lot of the times when I'm anxious, it's a lot of it shows up in the, I guess, the way I deal with things. No matter how good things are going, it's like you're waiting for that next shoe to drop. You're always waiting for like something bad to happen.
So, you're anticipating some sort of a mountain collapsing, like you're
Exactly.
anticipating something
Yep.
happening.
Mhm. And for me, like with work, sometimes it'll be like, you know what, we'll have a meeting and I'll sit there and think about all the different outcomes of this meeting before the meeting's even happened. And I'll go to like the worst possible scenario, and then it'll
Worst case scenario in advance. Okay.
exactly,
You don't even wait for something to happen. You're just in advance deciding, I'm going to worry right now and I'm going
exactly.
to come up with all the possibilities.
Yes.
Okay. What happens in your body? Like, do you physically experience anything as a result of all of these racing thoughts and worry thoughts and anxious thoughts?
Yeah, like I go through this like phase where, depending on like the level of like what I've put my mind through, I
Hmm.
sometimes I don't eat and I can't sleep, and
Hmm.
I feel like I can't like really engage with my kids, and then the guilt sets in and I'm like, oh my God, like I'm literally like neglecting all these other parts of my life because of this one thing. And so for me, it's
Hmm.
like always coming back and acknowledging the emotions that I'm feeling
Hmm.
to try to get past it. And I don't always get past it. Sometimes I just need that meeting to happen so that I can get past it.
Hmm.
But the build up for me is like sometimes it's very difficult.
Hmm.
What I've tried to learn to deal with is, you know, no matter what, even if the worst case scenario happens, it's still going to be okay. And I
Hmm.
think just reminding myself of that constantly. And it's okay to like be in touch with your emotions, and it's okay to like feel anxious, but acknowledge it.
Yeah. Acknowledging it is really great.
Mm-hmm.
And so, would you say the way anxiety shows up for you has changed over time? Or do you feel like there are still the same culprits that just seem to get away each time?
I'd say it has changed over time for sure,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
for me, the way anxiety used to show up in a way is like I didn't even know I was feeling it. I didn't know what to call it.
Mhm.
And I didn't really want to talk about it because I didn't know
Mhm.
how to talk about it, because there was this stigma attached to feeling a certain way. There's a stigma attached to like, oh my God, you're not anxious, you're fine. You're like you're
Mhm.
feeling fine. Like, you know, just go sleep it off, go eat
Mhm.
something. Just don't over exaggerate what you're feeling, you know, and that those are the things I
Mhm.
heard when I saw other people try to talk about it. So then I was like, oh, you know, maybe I just need to like be quiet and I just need to
Mhm.
be okay. And
Mhm.
so now when I look at it, I realize, and I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I'm feeling kind of anxious. And when I am feeling like that, a lot of the times I'll look at my husband, because he can like literally tell instantaneously. He's like, what's up? What's going on? Something's not right.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so we'll talk it out. And then I realize when I start talking about it, we'll talk and talk and talk and talk. And I
Mhm.
think, you know, just getting it out and having those conversations and having people in your life that allow you to talk out your feelings is also very, very important.
Mhm.
And I think
Mhm.
that's what I didn't have in the past, and that's sort of how it's changed from the way
Mhm.
I used to deal with it versus now, because I don't have to keep it in anymore. And I feel like I'm very open about the things that I'm feeling most of the time.
Yeah, that sounds like your awareness has built over time and that has
Exactly.
shaped maybe not so much how the anxiety shows up, but how you recognize it. And so how you
Exactly.
recognize and engage with it.
Mhm.
So you're the driver in that change and that shift.
Yes. And that's not to say it doesn't show up, because it continuously shows up.
Right. But you have a different alert system now, right?
Exactly.
Your
Yes.
alert system is much more on point
Mhm.
and it's not afraid to signal. And
Yes.
you know what signals to pay attention for, it sounds like.
Exactly.
Okay. So, Alyza, what would be your key messages to the listeners of the show? What do you want them to know?
So when I think about key messages surrounding mental health, I think it is so important that we destigmatize it. I think it is so
Mhm.
important that we look at our mental health in the same way that we look at our physical health.
Mhm.
Because every year you go to your doctor and you get a physical to make sure that your body's doing okay.
Mhm.
But why are you not getting a mental health check every year, or
Mhm.
every time you need it? And
Mhm.
why is there such a stigma still? And I think we've come a long way as a society, but I also think there's so much more work that we have to do, because
Mhm.
still till this day there's so many times that people just don't want to talk about their mental health, because it's like, oh my god, coming back to like, what will people think? What I really want to say is that, like, stop thinking about what everyone else will think. Think about
Mhm.
what you think about yourself. A lot of that kind of comes back to the fact that when we look at our mental health and our physical health, how it really goes together and how each impacts the other. And
Mhm.
how if you've got debilitating pain in your body, it's going to manifest mentally, because that's going to
Mhm.
affect you. In the same capacity, if you're dealing with constant crippling anxiety, it's
Mhm.
going to affect your body. And so I think just realizing
Mhm.
that, like, your body and your health, you have to look at it as a whole, and it doesn't matter if it's mental health
Mhm.
or physical health, it's the same thing. And I think, like, really, really destigmatizing that, and
Mhm.
really stopping that, like, sentiment of, like, continuously telling people, like, what will people think, and
Right.
you so much caring what people think.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think also realizing that when we break that down and we start talking about the things that we're going through, people actually think you're stronger than you think you are.
Mhm. Mhm. Those are some really amazing key messages and really important that you said that
Mm-hmm.
for the listeners. Excellent. So I'm curious, what would be something that you would be able to coin as game changing for you
Mm-hmm.
in terms of inspiration, something that's close to you that reflects your untold story? What was that key inspiration, that game changing key inspiration? For some people, it's a quote, a book, an event, a place, a person. What was it for you?
So when I think about that, I think about my mom. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason I say that is because she's one of the biggest inspirations in my life.
Mm-hmm.
She's been a constant support for me. And our relationship has changed through the years. And every time I look at something that I can't do, I always look back at her and I think, she started her life again at 50,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
she's doing amazing. And
Mm-hmm.
I look at her and I'm just like, she's my everything. And I think, like, we've got this
Mm-hmm.
amazing relationship, and I'm so blessed and I'm so lucky. And I always just, I wish that I could be half the person she was. And
Mm-hmm.
I think she's such an inspiration to me, because no matter what she has always been through, she's always had such a positive mindset.
Right.
And she's always been that person who's like, yes, you know what, like, we're all going through things, and it's okay to talk about things. And she was that person who was like, you need to go see a therapist, and that's perfectly
Mm-hmm.
normal. You need to deal with
Mm-hmm.
these issues. Because
Mm-hmm.
we would talk about things, and she'd always tell me that, you should go see someone, go talk to someone, go talk to an unbiased third party. These things are
Mm-hmm.
important. And so
Mm-hmm.
she was never that South Asian parent who was like, that's okay, go deal with it. What will people think? She was always like,
Right.
no, talk it out.
She normalized life circumstances for you. And it
Exactly.
sounds like from what everything that you're sharing, she's been like this constant in your world,
Hmm.
even when life was so wavery for you.
Yes, our relationship has changed so much through the years. It went from, like, me thinking she was doing everything to me by
Mm,
taking me away from my home in Kenya. Whereas, like, now I look back and I realize she did everything for me.
right,
She is my biggest inspiration. She is, honestly, she's my hero.
right.
Yeah.
That's so sweet. And it's such a nice way to reflect back and say, I was questioning things when I was younger. I was thinking she was doing everything to me.
Hmm.
And now that you can look back and say she was doing everything for me.
Yeah.
Well, shout out to mom, that's for sure. What a great shout out. So tell me, what's a cause or
Mhm.
organization that's been impactful to you on your journey that you would like to give a shout out to? If there was an organization
Mhm.
at the time, or if there's one that maybe you think now is something you wish you had then, or
Mhm.
anything in that regard. What was influencing you, or what was part of your world? Yeah.
So, a few years ago, I'd say, like, when I say a few years ago, probably like 15 years ago or so, my mom was, she was pivotal in starting this charitable organization called Social Services Network. And I
Hmm.
remember her talking to me about some of the programs they were running. And one of the things that really stood out to me was this program they were running for South Asian abused women. And the reason I say that is because obviously it hits home for me.
Right.
And what it was is, like, she would talk to me about some of the things that these women were going through at home, but they couldn't come out, and they just couldn't come out and talk about their situations at home, and they didn't have the resources to leave. And so she started this group for South Asian women to come out and, like, tell their stories, and, when the time was right, have the support to actually, like, leave. And I think that really just stood out to me because it showed the type of person that my mom, she wanted to help other women who had gone through similar experiences as her. And also it was really nice to see that, there were support groups for people who had been through abuse but may not have being able to just, like, pick up and leave when they
Right.
needed to leave because they had the resources and they had the support. Whereas, like, there's some women who come from a different country and then not having the option to pick up and leave. Like, it's just, you have to stay in this abusive household because your other option is, like, taking your kid and living on the street. And I think that's one of the things that sort of stood out to me in terms of, like, what my mom, she started with the
Hmm.
Social Services Network. And I think another organization is the company that I co-founded, Integra Health Center. And the reason I say
Hmm.
that is because it's a huge part of who I am, and
Hmm.
it also showed me that you can achieve the things that you put your mind to, and being that anxiety and, the imposter syndrome and all those things that I'd struggled with. It really showed me that, what, there's a lot to be said when you really, like, kind of try to talk through your issues and turn negatives into positives almost. And so we started Integra Health Center with the mindset that we wanted to look at the body and, like, look at patient outcomes as a whole. So mental,
Right.
physical, nutritional, like, everything. And so that's something that really obviously is really important to me as well.
Hmm. Amazing. So shout out
Mm-hmm.
to Social Services Network and to Integra Health Center. Great work. Amazing. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
how can people connect with you if they would like to? What are your handles and where are you findable?
I am on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook,
You have a website too, right?
my company's website, integrahealthcenter.com.
Amazing.
Yeah, I'm not a TikTok superstar yet, so
That's
stay tuned.
okay. That's okay. Well, we have all your social handles
Yeah.
actually. So we're going to put that all on the show notes page so people will be able to connect with you if they'd like to. All they have to do is go to daretoshare.co and it'll all be there. Amazing. Okay. Eliza,
Mm-hmm.
guess what?
You tell.
You just dared yourself to share. Congrats.
Thank you.
How was it? You just did it.
It was great. Like, it was amazing. Thank you for having me.
Alyza, I just want to convey that not only am I so gracious for you to be here, so there's no need for you to thank me. The gratitude is all mine. I actually want to convey how humbled I feel to be able to have had this very raw conversation with you, having you speak with full vulnerability and allowing me into some of the most intimate parts of your life, all the uncertainty that you endured, witnessing abuse that your mother went through, having to move from like one country or one continent to another, and all of the adjustments and what emerged for you in that process, the ever present imposter that's kind of been there, and the shock of marriage, the infertility journey, and how you openly tied it all back to the impact of your mental well being. Like I said, I'm just sitting here in gratitude for your sharing today. So, your story shall inspire many. So, thank you for the deep conversation and for all of the daring that you did today. So, once again, Alyza, thank you for being part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.